Hello, I'm Robert, and this is fact-checking the idea that so many of the scared people I help believe that they think that the IPCC says that civilization will collapse and that we're headed for some kind of great depression of negative growth. Then eventually, finally, after all of that, we might eventually manage to get into a better place. That could hardly be further from the truth. That is a myth that is shared by so many media stories. They just get it completely wrong. Both IPCC and IPBES, who did a very thorough study of the sociology, they are talking about a transformative change that maximizes everything. We've got increasing good quality of life. If you look down at all material things like food security, water security, livelihood and economics, that all increases and grows. And then also non-material things as well, and recreation and spiritual and freedom of choice and so on. All that improves as well. They've nearly all got double pluses or triple pluses, greatly improved with the global sustainable development. And that is what they mean by transformative change. Not collapse, but very positive. This is about IPBES. They was a team of nearly 32%, or nearly a third of them, are social scientists, and 9% were interdisciplinary scientists, and the rest were natural scientists. And this is the report. You will probably not even recognize it from what I say about it. This hit the news as 1 million species will go extinct. And that was the only thing really that most journalists said about it. Whereas actually it was a story about how to save 1 million species and how we can do that in ways that are positive in all those ways I described. It's improving good quality of life all round, and at the same time, same things that do that, save biodiversity, stop and reverse it, improve nature services, because all of those things benefit in the optimal path for good quality of life. That's what that said, but I can't remember. I don't see one media story that even said that. And then another myth that so many people believe is that the IPCC and IPBES were talking about transforming to a new politics, a communism or something like that, which is a big issue in some parts of the world, and they're very scared of communism. That's not what they said at all. And they didn't say that we should stop consumerism either. They say we need intelligent choices and we need to decide new ways of doing things. And they said embrace diversity and finding local solutions. And most important of all is empowering and enabling local communities and indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples look after 40% of the pristine ecosystems in the world. They're very important. And 25% of the world's land is looked after by indigenous people. They need to be empowered. And now this is an example of, this is how the transformative change, this shows that you can have a change very, very fast. In 1900, spot the car. If you look very closely, that's where it is. 1913, and this is 5th Avenue in New York, spot the horse-drawn carriage. 2 horses there. If you look very closely, you can see them. This was a transformative change in just 13 years, and civilization did not collapse. That's what they mean by transformative change. In our future, go forward maybe 10, 15 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, and there'll be electric cars, and the electricity will be powered by renewables. And we can do that too, and just as quickly, if we set our mind to it. That's the graphic I showed you. Do have a read through. These are all the things that improve the global sustainability. Then that improves equity, and it helps with the movement towards zero malnutrition and zero hunger and zero water poverty and so on around the world. So it's not just the wealthy countries that benefit, but the entire world benefits. And when, for instance, Africa is rich and prosperous and exporting and completely looking after itself and also in part of a positive, vibrant world, then that benefits all of us. So that's why global sustainability is plus, 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 plus. Most of them. I don't think any are a single plus. No, it's not a single of any of these indicators of good quality of life. Not one of them is even a single plus with the global sustainability approach, which is what the IPCC is saying we need to do. And this is an example of a transformative change. And this is actually in China, but there are many similar projects around the world. They actually just took the identical photo from the same place, so very easy to see how striking a change it was. And that's just 14 years. It went from there, which had been long time degraded land, where people had overgrazed it for many decades. And then in 14 years, they got back to that. That's a transformative change. These are real photos, they're not Photoshop. So you get a growth in good quality of life and both material and non-material. So leisure activities much better. And they exported, this region of China is now an exporter of luxury fruits, luxury foodstuffs to the rest of China. That's what the transformative change is. The UK is an example of a country, and then now this, we get, I am in the UK, and Boris Johnson, you get people saying, oh, he's not genuine, he's not going to do this green transformation, it's never going to work. We get so much skepticism, people, here. It would be the same for any politician, I think, here. It's not just personally Boris Johnson. If it had been Jeremy Corbyn who'd won the election, then I think that he also would have had people saying it, being just as sceptical of his plans for completely different reasons. But the United Kingdom is actually very successful in reducing its emissions. We have very fast reduction of our emissions, and we are on track, and if we keep going, we can reach zero emissions by 2050, and at the same time our GDP rose nearly 20%. And so few people in the UK probably know this. Our emissions are the same level of emissions as the global average in the world. And we are at the same level as we were in 1853. The last time the UK emissions were the same as they are today was in 1853, when this frigate, the frigate Madagascar, with 3 tons of gold on board, and it was probably lost to pirates in 1853. And so I just looked at the date in history, what happened in 1853, and this is one of the events. We sailed the sea in ships like this. That was the big news last time we had that would be the big news in the United Kingdom the last time our emissions were the same as they are today. The loss of this ship and 150 people on board. And they think probably pirates, but it's never been discovered, never been found. It may have been lost in a shipwreck also. And it's another thing that so many people think that we need to stop having kids. And this was from a really low quality research in 2017, where they claimed that each kid added so much to CO2 emissions. Very, very bad accounting how they did it. Because our kids, depending where you live, then they are going to bring about the zero carbon generation, and some of them, in some places, may be zero emissions already. And that's in just a few places, like Bhutan and I forget the name of that other, Suriname. If you take account of their forests, they are already in negative emissions. And Finland, then they will likely be negative emissions by 2035. And so we need our kids to bring about this zero carbon emissions future. They will be our zero carbon our generation's zero carbon kids, and they will be inventing technology like this, or they will be politicians, or whatever they're involved in. They will help bring around the first zero carbon, the world's first zero carbon industrial civilization, So it is, don't feel you shouldn't have kids. Your kids are needed to bring around this future. And we need to share the good science and the positive things that are happening in the world. There's so much positive going on, and you're not on your own, you're part of a social circle. And for instance, if you fly a lot, you might well think, oh, I produce so much emissions from flying, and so what does it matter? I don't need to bother about having a well-insulated home or getting efficient appliances. I've just lost it. That's not how to think about it. The aviation industry, indeed, is one of the few global industries that has a plan of heading towards greatly reduced emissions by and it's only 2%, and they're going to halve that to 1% of current emissions and their current plans, and then we do have the prospect of maybe even zero carbon in aviation, depending on technology. But whatever happens, we can also offset it by all the other things like reversing desertification and improving the soils and so on. So we can have a zero carbon future, including growth in traffic of aviation. And this is totally practical. It's in our zero carbon goals that we can do this. So we are working on this together, all of us together. And when you are saving a bit of energy in your home, for instance, then this is something positive we're doing as the world as a whole. And think of yourself as part of the world. And try sharing some of the good stories. How many of you have heard of this story? This is what they used to think. This is a better one. Until March 2021, when this new paper came out, then people used to think that soils around the world were pretty much uniformly going to dry, with just a few areas that would get wetter. But what they'd not, this is a greatly warmed world, this is business as usual, but it's the same even with small amounts of warming, and then what they found is that they'd been calculating using how dry the air got just above the surface of the soil. But if you take account of the plants and how plants can take water out of the air rather than how the air dries out, then it turns out that the world is actually going to get wetter. This is not surprising. We actually will have more rain falling and precipitation in a warmer world, but they thought that we'd have increased areas getting drier in that world because it would also be much warmer, even though there's more water vapor in the atmosphere. But with this new calculation and looking at how plants interact with moist air, then it's completely turned around, and it's actually, most of it is wet, with just some areas getting drier. I only saw that story in one place. Give me a moment or two and I'll bring it up. That's Carbon Brief, and they ran this story. Carbon Brief they're the only source I recommend for accurate news on climate change these days. I didn't see that taken up in the mainstream media anywhere. It's just too good news. So when you have good news, it's not shared. When you have bad news, let's bring it down again. When you get bad news, it does get shared. So please be aware of that and try sharing more of the good news. The journalists write what they think you want to read. So if you start sharing lots of good news, then hopefully journalists will start writing about good news. Nowadays, right now, if a journalist writes a good news story, who's going to share it? Very few people share the good news stories. So we are part of that. Get the journalists to know that we want to hear about the good, positive things that are happening in the world. This is a zoom in on that map. You can see what happens to Mexico. They used to think it would be uniformly dry out in a greatly warmer world. They now think that it would actually be, most of Mexico would actually get wetter in a warmer world. Get moisture, the soil would get moisture. Now, I want to talk about, this is a hugely misreported story that you may have believed. this it's just incredibly how badly this is reported in the mainstream media. The IPCC recommend that we slightly reduce the amount of meat that we eat globally. And it's not or the amount of meat that is produced. And you might wonder, why would we do this? They're not, and this gets hugely misreported by the mainstream media, and they just say over and over again, the IPCC are saying we've got to become vegan. This is hopeless. The world is doomed because there's no way we're all going to become vegan. You've probably heard this narrative. It's repeated quite a lot. But they just say the world is doomed. We've all got to be vegan. We can't be vegan, so the world is doomed. The doom selling that the media do. This could hardly be further from the truth. So, first of all, you need to know how much land is set aside for our meat. And this is the area that's set around for growing cropland, about the size of China in the entire world. Obviously not China, but that's scattered around the world. If you look at the land area set aside for meat, there's the same area as both Americas, north and south. A huge amount of land is set aside for meat. Now, some of that is sustainable, and it's not contributing to climate change. For instance, the hill sheep, where I live in in Scotland, then you could hardly say that's doing much to climate change, to causing problems with climate change. So you've got to. So it's not saying that we shouldn't eat meat, but if we make an intelligent choice, some of that meat is pressurizing on fragile ecosystems, or the soybeans or the grains grown in deforested tropical rainforest, for instance. And we only need to reduce the amount of meat we eat by a small amount to remove that pressure. And reduce the amount of meat we eat globally by 20%, or just reducing by a fifth. So one meatless meal, one meatless day a week would do it, or 15%. Let's say give different figures. One meatless meal a week would do it, and that would hugely reduce the amount of land that that is pressurizing. Indeed, that would end all the land pressure on tropical rainforests and other pressure ecosystems if we could just do that. So that's why they say it's so important. So, but there are many ways of doing it. It doesn't even need to be. These are the different approaches. This is from the IPCC report on climate change in the land, and this shows the effect on the global gigatons of CO2. That if we all switch to a Mediterranean diet, which is perhaps half the meat most people eat, then that would save us 3 gigatons a year. An intelligent, a climate carnivore, however, that is a climate, someone who eats meat but does it in an intelligent way, selecting what kind of meat they eat in the way that's best for the climate, that actually saves a somewhat more meat than the Mediterranean diet. If you go for the most healthy diet of all, so you just optimize your diet for health with limited sugar, meat and dairy, that saves over 4 gigatons if everyone did that. The vegan diet does save most of all, about 8 gigatons. But we don't need to all do that for the demand side mitigation of greenhouse gas. And so if you like a vegan diet, or you're according to your belief system that's something you want to do, then fine, absolutely, that's good for the climate. But we don't all need to do that. There are many options if you want to develop a climate-friendly diet, including climate carnivore. Although everyone would, if you eat meat all the time, then 1 meatless day a week is good for your health. So if you can develop a taste for a vegetarian diet just 1 day a week, I know some people that's very difficult to do, and they just can't even, the thought of eating just vegetables for 1 day, they find just obnoxious, and they just can't do it. But for those who can do it, and acclimatized maybe as children as well, and that's why the United Kingdom is I don't know how far they've got with this, but there was the plan for one meatless day a week for school dinners, for instance, and then children can get used to having vegetarian meals one day a week, and then it'd be easier to do that as adults. So it's just nudging, but it's not. They're not forcing people to eat less meat. It's happening anyway, and the United Kingdom expects to have a reduction by a fifth in the amount of meat that we eat in the United Kingdom through a combination of all these things. And then it's not just that, it's also the meat that is wasted. So if you go and look at a field full of sheep, say, and see if there's, say, 10 sheep there, 2 of those sheep is meat that's wasted. About a fifth of all the meat that we raise is wasted. Those 2 sheep were killed and nobody ate them. They just put them aside on their plate, or it went off in the fridge, or whatever happened, or it was never sold in the shop. So if we can reduce meat waste, that's also going to make a huge improvement. Indeed, just if we could eliminate meat waste, that would be as good as reducing the amount of meat we eat by a fifth. And some people, for instance Tibetans, then their physiology may make it very difficult to eat a vegan diet or vegetarian diet. The Dalai Lama, he tried to switch to a diet of vegetables, milk and eggs, and he got very ill because they have lived and they have evolved as indigenous people. They developed adaptations to be able to, for instance, the Dalai Lama would probably be able to manage fine with much lower levels of oxygen than most people. He could probably climb Everest more easily than anyone because he's got a Tibetan background, and they have adaptations to their bodies which let them use oxygen much more efficiently than most people. And in there are several indigenous people that have that adaptation. The Tibetans are one of them. And but the other part of his adaptation is Tibetans are adapted to eat meat, and it's very difficult for Tibetans to go on a completely vegetarian or vegan diet. And that's probably the same also for Inuit. I don't know for sure. And so whether you even can easily go to meat, so don't sacrifice your health in order to go vegetarian or vegan. If it's making you ill, don't do it. We don't need that. We don't need ill people in order to solve the problems of climate change. And so there are many things you can do, and there are other recommendations from IPBES, dealing with food waste, perverse subsidies, and then this is one of their big things. 2 of the big things from the IPBES report was the perverse subsidies, that where we reward the bad actors for cutting down rainforest or using agricultural land in a non-sustainable way, depleting the soil and so on, or and fossil fuel producers, and we have subsidies to use fossil fuels. We need to remove those perverse subsidies and instead subsidize the good actors. And most companies are actually very climate aware, and you have CEOs of the companies may well care greatly about the climate. It's a sensible thing to do. As we saw earlier on, it's improvement of good quality of life for everyone, including the CEOs of big companies and their families as well. It's a better world for everyone. So sensible people will want that. And more people around the world in positions of power as well are understanding this. So there are many companies that are actually good actors, and that are actually doing positive things for the environment. And the IPBES found that many of the companies are indeed good actors. And they said what we need to do is to incentivize the good actors and stop incentivizing the ones that are actually harming the environment. And so we have these perverse subsidies that actually not just leveling the playing field, but making the people that harm nature services, they actually gain in competition with the ones that don't, because of these perverse subsidies. And it best say we need to shift the subsidies the other way, so that we reward those that benefit nature. And that is the tendency of most companies anyway, but they're losing out in competition to the ones that harm it because of these perverse subsidies. And then the other thing that we need to do is to, and the good news is that people are acting on this, and many countries are already implementing IPBES recommendations, and we've got a big conference coming up this autumn where they're coming together to work more on actually doing this. So few people know that. All this is going on in the background. The scientists and the more intelligent and the more thoughtful of the politicians, they know these things. But the journalists are not explaining it to the general public. This is going on, so much positive. And then the other thing is empowering local communities, indigenous people. I already talked about that. That was one of the main things in the IPBES report. So I'll leave the link to this in the video description, and I suggest you go and have a read, especially if you want to go into technical background and listen to the videos by the scientists, listen to the press briefings, go to the scientists themselves, and they explain things very well in their transcripts and the video, their short summaries and the press briefings. And then if you can also have a look at the reports itself, which is now out and public for the IPBES report, and it's there for anyone to read, where you can read in great detail about their findings. So anyway, I'll upload this to my YouTube channel. Do like and subscribe to get more videos like this. A shout out for our Doomsday Debunked group on Facebook, where we help people who are scared of things like this with fact checking and just not sugarcoating, but we do positive framing, which is looking at the positive things that are going in the world and counteracting the negative framing and the junk science and totally false things that are said, such as this collapse of civilization. It's not in any of the reports, and and also I'll just mention, I'll do another video about this. The reports say nothing about billions of people dying. The reports are about migration and about adapting, and even in the worst case scenario, then it may be tens of millions of people who either have to adapt, or they have to some of them may move, but people migrate anyway. There's always migration going on, people moving from one place to another. And as we saw above in that map before, yes, let's just end with that. As we saw above, then some places are getting wetter while some are getting drier. So people will tend to migrate towards the wetter places. That doesn't mean that everyone goes from the place that got a bit drier. That doesn't mean they all move. But it means that some of the people, it remains a populous place with big cities and millions of people, and then some of them move to the places, the part of their country that has got better for agriculture. So we can expect some of that. That is already going on. We expect more of that to happen in the future. And this is also one of these things that's not very well explained. So I'll do another video about that. I've already got a blog post about that.